Hey everyone, how's it going today? Well, as far as I know, I'm still alive, so I guess the apocalypse did not come today. I wasn't really even going to speak about it. I actually had somebody ask me last night, what do you think about the whole, 23rd of September prophecy? And I thought it was coincidental, of course, synchronous rather, that somebody asked me that. Not even an hour before I'd taken a few notes, and I was thinking about making a video about this very subject, the idea of failed prophecies and the end times, and how religion and, I should say, extremely twisted minds have deluded themselves into thinking that they're prophets, and how every single year it's going to be the end of the world again. I suppose I should back up a little bit and explain where I'm coming from, in case many of you who probably don't know and say, what do you mean the 23rd is the end of time? I'm not even going to get into the guy's name that started this whole thing, but just another extreme theoretician. I wouldn't even call them that. What do you call these people? They're fearmongers, I guess, if anything, but some guy who claims he studied the Bible and he's found this Bible code that says that this prophecy is coming true because of a particular planetary alignment, and that these things were all foretold. He even goes as far as to say, things like the, solar eclipse and all this predict it. And I'm, the whole time thinking, well, there's a solar eclipse every year. Why is this special? Well, because it's in America, of course. And it goes on and on. The idea was that supposedly in the Bible somehow there's a code that claims that this is the end times and that today is the end time day. Well, of course, he's since then clarified that it's not the end times today. It's actually supposed to be the beginning of the end times. The sixth seal is opened today, for those who are familiar with biblical terminology. And when I sit here and laugh at prophecy and laugh at these things, somebody who's really into that kind of stuff might say, well, you just need to do more research, and hey, these things are possible, and these guys know what they're talking about. If you're young especially, and you haven't been on the internet long, and you haven't seen that this happens every single year, hopefully you'll be able to do enough of your own rational thinking to figure out that these people do this on a consistent basis to try to get it right, let's just say. Now, first time I heard of anything prophecy related was back in the mid-90s, when I got into my first type of eccentric or occult type information. I would say that before I even knew what the word occult meant, or any of that, I did a little bit of meditation, and I'd read a little bit about numbers and symbols and stuff, but very little. I'd actually read more of the Bible on my own free will, and I was raised without any religion. I wasn't raised anti-religious. I wasn't raised anti-prophecy or anything like that. I just happened to not discover it until I was out on my own. My parents just never mentioned it. And I should say not out on my own, but when I was thinking on my own as a teenager. And it was about 14 or 15 years old when I started getting into these things. And I think it was I was 16 years old, I believe, the first time I picked up the Holy Bible and decided to flip to the back and read Revelation. And I found it fascinating. I sat and read it, as far as I can remember, I think I just sat and read the whole thing for the most part, trying to understand it as a 15-year-old. But even then, understanding the metaphors and symbols and saying, wow, people could take this any way they want. But the reason I was reading it was not to convince myself it was true, nor to even because I was curious about Christianity, but rather so I could be armed with the proper information to discuss the issue of Revelation, knowing that people through my lifetime would bring up this passage, this chapter, as being a major important thing. So being armed with that information allowed me to discuss it over the years. And since then, and at least since '98, when I first read a book called Behold a Pale Horse by William Cooper, and he was a Christian, and he talked a lot about prophecy and end times, and I wouldn't say he gave any specific dates, but during the time of reading that book, it really it got me on this, morphed my brain into thinking the government's out to get us. the people are out to get each other, and that there's this giant world conspiracy, and that pretty soon we're going to declare martial law, or that some prophecy is going to happen. And for, at least 4 or 5 years, I at least now and again would tell people about it. I remember telling my mom and my friends and relatives, like, hey, did you know that, we've always been lied to? So anyhow, realizing the lie, I started to look more into, is there any real evidence to support that there's anything that is hidden? And that's when I got into wanting to understand the occult. And occult, by definition, means hidden. And the more I studied the occult, the more I realized nothing was hidden. It wasn't a matter of a particular passage or book or chant or spell that's locked away, or prayer. It was a matter of the people not willing to look within themselves to find that it takes intention, time, perseverance, and dedication to attain any type of Buddhahood or enlightenment, or any type of knowledge that's really worth anything. You can't just learn something in a night and your brain knows it and you believe it. These are things that take time and practice. And over years we can convince ourselves to either think a certain way and delude ourselves, or we can convince ourselves that our brains really are plastic, which neuroplasticity is becoming less and less disputed as being a fact, that our brains don't have a dedicated centers for these things. If we're missing half of our brain, then our right brain will become our left brain as well. And the point to that is that when we learn things, our brains can morph, and they're plastic in order to mold to fit our new lifestyle. And understanding how we can be deluded and how we can delude ourselves is very important to not being fooled. So maybe that sounds a little off track, but I'm coming back full circle to this prophecy thing. It's complete bullshit. I should say it's about 8 o'clock tonight. So if he's going for the U.S. and going by Pacific time, I guess at the very latest we've got 4 more hours for the world until this prophecy takes hold. And let me tell you something. Every single year this happens. I'm surprised it was in September this year. Usually it's in October. The idea of the October surprise, that's been applied to so many different bullshit conspiracies and prophecies about whether the government's going to declare a false flag this month, or there's going to be a major event and the grid's going to get wiped out, or an asteroid's going to hit, or my favorite, Nibiru is coming. If you try to explain that the pull of gravity, something that large, would be recognizable and that even astronomers would be able to see it, and then you argue, well, hopefully you're not a flat earther too, because you can't believe in Nibiru if you're a flat earther, right? Or can you? I don't know. Not to poke fun, but to poke fun, because the real message I want to convey is that it's bullshit. Nibiru may be a real planet. Nibiru may have really existed. In fact, astronomers have even found that there's a gravitational pull that declares that there may be another planet out there, a rogue planet that goes on an elliptical orbit. All this could be true, but it's a fallacy to consider that proving that it's a fact that Nibiru exists, that it's going to hit the Earth on this date or whatnot. The whole thing being that if something happens, it's going to happen. But so far, none of these predictions or prophecies have come true. People use old prophecies by saying, well, look, this person said this, or the Bible said that, forgetting that they were just repeating mere stories that happen over and over. These are repeating storylines that continue to happen. Governments are created and fail. People go into an age of decadence, and then they collapse, and they start to steal, and their economy goes bad. These aren't things that you can prophesy. These are things that just we know are going to happen. They happen regularly. So, the more you study history, the less validity you give to modern prophecies, and the more you find that people are just grasping for anything they can find to prove themselves right. And very often these supposed prophets are modern-day prophets. Not to say that there aren't any real prophets, but I'm saying, has anybody been right about anything? If they have, is it really something that's that they could have done anything about? And the point being, are people just taking wild guesses, shots in the dark, trying to be right about stuff? Because I've heard a lot of these guys say, well, look, this guy was right about this, or this guy was right about that. I'm like, well, but how did that serve you or help you? And are you just, is he just saying, look, I'm right, look, I'm right? Because I'll tell you, when the end times really come and the shit really hits the fan, nobody's going to be able to be on the internet bragging about being right, They might be able to just sit there in their own world and say, oh, I knew this would happen. But so will the rest of the people who knew that the shit was going to hit the fan one day, but didn't sit and try to plan out which day it would be. So I'd like to say that I've actually been into these things for a long time, and I know what I'm talking about when it comes to the way that the mind can create a reality for you to believe people or ideas. Especially when you read a book, you might become enamored with the author for a while and say, wow, this guy's so smart. These are the same things that happen with religious leaders, but it gets to the point where we believe the people more than the stories themselves, and fail to do research. We use fallacies. A good example for me anyway is David Icke. A lot of people really like him. I personally can't stand the guy. And some people will say, but he says this and this, and it's true. And I say, well, of course. There's a lot of things that people say that are true. It doesn't mean that everything they say is true. If some of the words you're saying are tainted so bad that they, that they corrupt the rest of what you're saying, or negate it in some ways, then that's up to the individuals to decide. I would consider it somewhat like religion. It's not that I'm opposed to people believing in God. I think it's a great thing. But when religion is used to classify and justify homicide, or justify the fact that, well, we'll put it in God's hands and let the climate fall apart and let the world fall apart, let society and government fall apart, then that becomes a problem. When you're abusing your kids because they don't believe what you believe, or because you think they're sinners, that's a problem. When you are kicking your kids out of the house because they're teenagers and they're gay and it doesn't jive with your religion, that's a problem too. And these things affect us in many more ways than we realize, our beliefs, especially with religion. But in respect to that, I was going to make a video specifically on that subject, not to offend anyone, but because it's an open discussion. The idea that people think that, well, we need to pray for others if they don't believe what we believe. Like people saying, well, I left my religion and my family disowned me and said they'll pray for me. And I said, well, why are you praying for me? I'm happy. I'm having a great life. And it's because religion looks to the future. They look to after you're dead, the afterlife. Every single one of them has something to do with what comes next, rather than what we can do right now, and that takes away our power. And as well, religion, people are discouraged from seeking knowledge, for seeking answers from any other method. They're even discouraged from researching their own religion because they think they'll be tainted by Satan or whatever it might be. In the modern day, even, Scientology and Mormonism is the same way. They're encouraged to not research, the roots and the foundation of what they believe, because religious leaders know the whole thing would fall apart if people really started questioning. And that's what's happened in America. In the 70s, I think it was only like 4.5% of Americans said that they were non-religious, and today it's up to like 20% or 23%. And for younger kids, teenagers and younger, I think it's higher, even up to 35% or 34%. And they're not affiliating themselves as atheists or hateful of religion, but rather they just think for themselves. And as the religious institutions decay, as people realize that the Catholic Church is, how is it any better with priests that have been caught molesting children? An article I read the other day of an infant dying during his baptism. And when I went to look it up, instead of finding an article about an infant dying from baptism, it was all the articles were people asking, what if my infant dies before he's baptized? That's the biggest concern people have, is whether their infant's going to go to heaven or hell if they're not baptized in time. But then we have this parent that's going to live with their kid who's been dunked in water without even, he didn't plug the nose of the baby suffocated. I'm thinking, this is moronic. It's archaic, and it's offensive to intelligent people that people are still doing these things. And for the longest time, I was strongly opposed to religion, and then for a couple of years I said, well, live and let live, and I think if these practices help people, so be it. But I keep seeing how much people are harmed rather than helped by religions and beliefs and prophecies. And many of these so-called end times prophecies, they're almost always by religious people, or people who claim to be religious. And it's always about the other guy as the enemy. And any question you have for these people, you become one of Satan's spawns, or a demon, or a monster, or I've been accused of being a reptilian, or all these different things, merely for not agreeing with someone. It's the ultimate fallacy, is anybody who doesn't believe what you believe is the enemy, who's been influenced somehow by demons. It's preposterous, you know. We're putting God over humanity, and for religious, that's what we're supposed to do. But we're forgetting that humanity is rooted in God. If you believe in God, you have to really believe in the all-inclusiveness of people. And we pick and choose what we want, you know. You know, whether we're reading the Quran or the Bible, you know, you may say that, you know, non-believers need to be punished, but are you willing to go as far as to stone them to death? Or stone non-believers or your own family members? Rape and genocide, all these things are in these holy books because they came from times when these things were acceptable. And the one thing about religion that has caused the most problems, it isn't just the beliefs or people's practices. It's the unwillingness to look at things through a fresh lens. Okay? Science came about because religion was so oppressive and archaic. They refused to look at anything else. When the telescope was invented, it was suppressed for 100 years. You know, Copernicus and Galileo were both considered heretics by the church, and the books were banned. This happened all the time. You can't imagine how many books and authors were banned that you never even heard of, because the church was so afraid of knowledge. And anything that is self-evident should not need backing by hiding knowledge. You should be able to say, go for it. You do your research, and you'll come back to it because we know it's true. But this is proof to me, utter proof, that the church has always wanted control over people more than they want what's right. The Pope, the whole Catholic Church, it's just preposterous. It's disgusting to me. It's elegant. It's, you know, full of gold and ornate. And people say, well, this is what, you know, we do this to show our dedication to God. And you say, but you're talking about Jesus, a man who was modest and said to give to the poor. It makes no sense. It's complete bullshit. The properties they own, they have stocks and bonds bought in oil and many fossil fuel industries. You know, the church is a business. And other churches have fed on that by watching what happens. And this is how, it's not that Joseph Smith founded Mormonism in order to make a bunch of money. But everyone else who saw what was happening was able to feed off of that and eventually turn it into a business. And this is what happened with Scientology. L. Ron Hubbard was known to be a business-oriented man that wrote science fiction novels. And he himself said in an interview, and you can watch it, he says, if you want to, you know, make the ultimate money, you start a religion, and it's tax deductible. I mean, he did exactly what he said he was going to do, and yet people still want to believe so desperately that they won't even look at recent history a couple decades ago to see this guy saying he's going to form a church, basically. And like I said, Scientology is they're urged not, I mean, they're not allowed to look at anything on the internet, anything opposed to the church. It's a wild system. I mean, it is the ultimate definition of cult, if there ever was one. But can we apply that to Mormonism too? They have to pay their church for the rest of their lives. When they leave the Mormon church, they go on their, when they're 18, the boys go on their missions. I've talked to lots of missionaries that come to my door. They always wear their white shirts and ties and their little backpacks and ride bicycles. Always got helmets on, being safe. They're usually really nice kids, and they mean well. They were just raised to believe what they believe in the desert. And I talk to them, and they're pretty convinced with what they believe, but I can tell they always they end up wanting to leave rather than me wanting them to leave, because they don't want to hear the facts that, you know, how can you be quite sure that it's okay that other people believe, and how can you think that you have a monopoly on what's right and what's true? So sorry to get a little off topic for the religion aspect of it. I wanted to use that as kind of a prerequisite, talking about where I've come from. I believed in conspiracies for a long time, as far as, I shouldn't put it in those terms, but rather I believed that the end times were coming for a long time. Not biblical, not for any other reason that I see what's happening with the system, the money system. I've got books like Thomas Piketty, who wrote Capital. I've got The Creature from Jekyll Island, which is by, I think, Edward Griffin. It's this thick. It's about the Federal Reserve. Boring as hell, but exciting if you're into money and want to know where, I shouldn't say into money, if you're into understanding economics. And for me, I'm not into economics. I hate money. But that's why I wanted to understand it. So I'm not just an idiot going along with what other people tell me is true. When people say trickle-down economy, I say bullshit. You know, I see the GOP and how they've pushed these ideas over the years. But meanwhile, the church has been pushing their ideas. Everybody's pushing their ideas. So I was a little bit into this whole 2012 thing. And so I bought this book years ago, in 2010 or something. It's called 2012, The Return of Quetzalcoatl. And Quetzalcoatl was the Mayan serpent god, if you will. I won't go into details. This book, it was fascinating to me. I thought, you know, wow, are we really heading for, you know, something happening in 2012? And the more I learned about it, the more I realized it wasn't until like halfway through 2012 when I said, okay, nothing's going to happen. Even though it was still on the way, and I thought it would be great if something did happen, I said, it's not what the Mayans predicted. They just had the end of a Baktun, or a section of their calendar. And understanding that gave me, you know, a better understanding of making up a date, creating a date through leap years. And this is why people with prophecies, you have to ask, okay, what are they going by? Dates or celestial alignments? And if so, where's the evidence? If it's dates, you're talking about leap years, you're talking about the fact that, I can't remember which king it was, or they actually eliminated 2 weeks from the calendar when they realized that it was getting out of sync. Back in like 1500s, I think. So there was like 1 month that had 15 days of February, something like that. Time has changed so much. The dates have changed so much. How do you know that a prophecy that's based on a date is totally legitimate in any way? Because all the dates are created by humans. So I bought this one afterwards, towards 2012, Perspectives on a New Age. This was also by Daniel Pinchbeck. Don't quote me. I think Daniel died a few years back, so I'm not positive. I don't know if it was him or someone else, but those books, I honestly don't even remember what was in them at this point. I learned a lot about Mayan culture, about symbols, about the occult. It kind of set me on a little track to, you know, to understand something like this, which is the last book relating to the end times, Collapse by Jared Diamond. This guy also wrote Guns, Germs, and Steel, which you probably heard of. There's a documentary based on it. The book is phenomenal. Collapse is phenomenal. It's actually called Collapse, How Societies Choose to Fail or Succeed. And the example that they use examples like, you know, of course, Easter Island. And the claim is, of course, that they used up all the trees and there was all this warfare. There's a lot of evidence now to show that that's not true, that's not how it happened. They're learning new things about cultures to say, well, maybe they didn't destroy themselves, but still many have. And the most legitimate story in there is in Papua New Guinea. And in Papua New Guinea, I'll try to simplify this for the sake of the video. When white man landed there and wanted to colonize the place, they didn't go inland for, I think, a decade or a couple decades. The tribes on the inside of the island didn't even know that there were people on the coast. The inlanders never went to the coast because it's surrounded by mountains. When they finally got inland, they saw these people living in these primitive areas that had been there for 40,000 years, growing random food out in the jungle, doing it their way. It worked. They're alive. They had their rules. And these guys come in and say, no, 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 no. You guys have to learn how to do it our way. This is great. You guys have these big mountainsides. You should terrace on the mountainsides and you can grow much more food. And so the first year that they did it, massive rains came, and since there was nothing holding the hillsides down, there was massive landslides, and people lost their lives and their crops were ruined. That shows that, you know, that's something they couldn't foresee because they didn't think to grow that way. They knew better than to tear all the plants out of the hillside and try to terrace it. But we trust in others that we see that seem to be doing better than us. So when the white man comes with all these great tools and wants to show you how to do something differently, You listen, but it only lasts so long until you realize white man's destroyed himself. And so we create delusions to understand our world and ourselves. I'm hoping the camera's still going. Getting to be a long video, but you know, I wanted to get my points, the points at least that I had to make across. One of the things that's holding us back through our delusions is advancement of medicine to help others. Things like religion holding us back from stem cell research. Or people believing that it's okay if we destroy the planet because it's in God's hands. That's why religion came into this. Because the end times that we're supposed to be facing could be very well manifested by us, and we may very well, many of us, want that to happen. And I know that because there was a time in my life where I secretly hoped that the shit would hit the fan. Even to this day, it's very difficult for me to break the idea that the excitement that might happen if there was a major electromagnetic issue and the grid went down. Because I was a prepper for a while, and I know I've got food and I know how to survive. I don't want to go through that or put my kids through that. But at the same time, there's something inside me that says we need to reset before we destroy our own environment. But it's not even about the planet, because I know the planet will be fine. So I have to get into the psychological thing and ask, I just want to see the shit go down. And then come to terms with that and realize, honestly, in my heart, I really would prefer not to. I would prefer that humans are able to come together. As long as we're believing different gods, we won't come together. We will always think that the other guy is the enemy. Does this mean religion will be abolished? No. And I don't think that it's something that we can even really discuss or understand. You know, it's such a complicated issue, and there's so many different facets to it. And it's not just religious, you know, it's not just political, it's just being human. It's complicated enough trying to understand who the hell and what the hell are we. So we created stories to explain that, and that's what religion came out of. But now we're in the modern day. We see what science has done for us, and now religion has often made science the enemy. I hear people talk about science as if it's a group of conspirators. And I say, science is a method. There are scientists, and some of them do stick together. Many of the mainstreamers do. But there are enough rogue scientists that want to find the truth, because that's generally the type of person who wants to do experiments and find the truth. They may not have the funding to test for all the things that we would like to, but the fact is that we're trying, and there are a lot of people out there who really do care. Selective reasoning, selective bias, that's just how we live. So that brings me to my final book, Oliver Sacks, Hallucinations. If you want to know how people think and create their own realities, often understanding why we hallucinate and how we delude ourselves, will give a perspective of how we've come to where we are now. People will tell you they had an experience, or that they felt something or sensed something. They'll tell you something happened in history, or that something's going to happen in the future. The only things you really know are what you've seen and felt and experienced yourself. But the things that you want to understand about the external world, other lands, other places, other times, you have to believe and trust in other humans. And that's very difficult for some of us, but if you don't trust in any humans, you'll never know a thing. Because even if you're just religious and you believe your pope and you believe your pastor, you're believing a person. Regardless of you're trusting that they learned things properly. We have to do that. And when it comes to science and progress and understanding prophecy, future, past, all these things, we have to use our reason, and we have to use our conscious effort to weed out the bullshit. And we have to have our bullshit detectors on constantly. So it's not about praying for other people that don't believe what you believe. It's about asking ourselves why we're resistant to admitting that sometimes we just don't know. And when it comes to God, I think that that's the way it's been, and there's a reason for that. It's not about proving what we know is true. It's about reflecting with other people and being honest. So maybe we can get over the idea that today is that last day in history. So, rant over. Bid you all adieu. have a fantastic evening, and I will talk to you soon. Peace.